With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind. Enlighten my intelligence and wisdom, so that I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. So we are presently then looking at the paramita of diligence, which, by the way, and I think many of you would have heard this many times, you know, the Sanskrit virya, and of course what we also understand with diligence here as we're explaining it from Jigme Lingpa, is really the understanding that diligence, as we sometimes have it in the sort of more traditional European or American or Western way, is sort of like, yeah, you're pushing yourself. You have to be diligent. And that's actually not what's implied really in the Mahayana context, where diligence is more understood as simply the sort of the joy and the enthusiasm that naturally takes place as we're in the process of something that's really valuable. So that's where there's actually a joy that takes place, virya. So, so here then the root text says, let me just check if I got the right, I think it's 85, yeah, that's right, okay. And just a second, I'm just gonna, okay. Yeah, okay. And by the way, you have a fly that seems to be, I sort of have a resident fly here, Josephine. And she very much likes to sort of walk on for some reason, she likes to walk on the camera. So you'll occasionally sort of see this sort of shadow go across the camera. That's Josephine. Anyway, with punctual and timely diligence, like swans that hasten to their groves, we should devote ourselves to all the practices of virtue, not leaving them forgotten in the pit of laziness. So Kangyur Rinpoche comments, it is extremely important never to lay aside our efforts to hear and reflect upon the teachings, and never to give up the practice of the three trainings. With a fully perfected sense of diligence, we should apply ourselves to virtue without delay, not leaving it abandoned and forgotten in the ravine of the three kinds of laziness. Rather, we should be like swans who hatch their eggs in a thicket, but take to the water as soon as their chicks are strong enough. So we have three kinds of laziness. And actually here, let's see, they're defined in terms of, let's see, the three kinds of laziness are explained, as explained in the following paragraph, as an inclination to unwholesome ways. And what do we mean with unwholesome? Well, in the Buddhist context, it's simply those actions that are just counterproductive. So that means essentially things that make us unhappy, but also things that are detrimental and not helpful for our practice. And then discouragement, sort of giving up. I can't do this. And then finally, self-contempt. I'm an awful person. Sometimes in the teachings on shamatha, we have similarly also three ways of understanding laziness, which are similar, which is one is, I give you Josephine, one is laziness in the classical sense of just not feeling like doing anything. It's not just being tired, but it's really just being slothful, just sort of gravitating towards wasting time. The second is, and this is in a different context then, where we then say laziness is just wanting to be busy all the time, sort of the workaholic, but essentially activity that is an escape. And then finally, there is similar to here, there's this self-discouraging or this self-disparaging, which is also this sense that I can't possibly do this. You know, I look at my teacher, he's so sublime. I could never do what the teacher does. So that's where we have these famous three kinds of laziness. But here then they are then the inclination towards what is unwholesome, discouragement, and self-loathing, basically. So that's where the root text then says, people are engrossed in wrongful actions. They are tangled in the strings of their distracting pastimes. Discouragement oppresses them, and even what they can do, they neglect. Putting themselves down, they wallow in faint-heartedness. They are like people who set sail in leaking ships. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, so this is with regards to the three kinds of laziness. The first then is described in terms of people are inextricably entangled in the affairs of this world. They are engrossed in them, overwhelmed by the bustle of mundane activities and societies. They cling to their dear ones. They repudiate their adversaries. They immerse themselves in the accumulation, preservation, and increase of wealth. And from all these cares, they cannot free themselves. They are like silkworms imprisoned in the cocoons of their own making. Now, what we mean here with the affairs of this world is really when we're like caught by it. We're not talking about having a regular job or basically being an ordinary citizen. That's not an issue. It's when this becomes obsessive in the sense of wanting to have success and really defining our worth in terms of our worldly success. So, you know, when you have, for example, Chogyam Trungpa's Shambhala teaching, there's a lot of emphasis of actually being a wholehearted participant in this world. And that's very different because that's an expression of discipline. And that is sadhana, that is practice. But here, what Kangyur Rinpoche and Jigme Lingpa they're on about is this sort of just completely forgetting about what really matters and just focusing on a very small project, which is just about what will make us feel good in terms of our particular existence in this world. Completely ignoring actually what it is that creates the most real thing there is, which is our whole experience of our life, and ignoring that, which is our mind, and allowing our mind to just get engrossed in confusion and completely ignoring the causes that sets the mind free. And the paradox is that when people are engrossed in these kind of activities, they really think that this is what's going to make them happy. Of course, we have endless literature and endless, you could say, expressions of artistic expressions that highlights how this is not going to make us happy. But nevertheless, with the limited vision that we so often are being provided, and what we also are, you know, the modern outlook, well, there's nothing else. There's nothing except just trying to pursue pleasure for your own benefit, or maybe for a few select friends and family. So there's a very, very narrow vision about the nature of our existence and what it contains. And that's where then we seriously get lost. So this is where we then are like silkworms imprisoned in the cocoons of our own making. So that's what's called inclination towards what's, you know, not particularly helpful. Then there's the second one. Moreover, they are overpowered by the laziness of discouragement and tell themselves that they are unable to accomplish even those achievements of Dharma that are only slightly difficult. Now, Dharma is not really that difficult, let's face it. It's about doing what's constructive, avoiding what's destructive, and gaining insight into the nature of the mind and mastering it. But even just the most simple practice of doing something virtuous is so simple. And yet it's very often that our mind just goes all sorts of places and just doesn't really, you know, remain focused on that, even though it's so easy. So he says here, destitute of energy in the practice of virtue, they constantly postpone it. So that's where, like, well, I'm busy doing something, and it's, I'm all caught up in that, and then being distracted. And particularly, and you could say the modern world is just completely full of possibilities for distraction. We are so entertained. We are entertaining ourselves to death. And that's where the modern situation really requires that we are very aware of this particular fact of so much distraction, and also the resulting notion that, well, I can't do this. That's part, even though it's so simple. So that's the second one, discouragement. Then the last one is then self-disparagement or self-loathing or whatever we call it. And that's where it says, and they put themselves down with thoughts like, oh, but how could I ever do such things? To wallow in this kind of depression is to cut oneself off from the Dharma. People like this have no chance of gaining freedom, foundering as they do in the ocean of the three kinds of laziness. It is as though they're on a leaking ship. They have no prospect of gaining the other shore. So the last one then is this kind of mentality of depression, which is simply that, no, I can't do more than this. The Dharma is too big, it's too vast, and so on. So that's where you can say that's in a more traditional text where the Dharma actually is common practice, and then where there's a lot of great teachers. And so you look at the great teachers and you think, just like in the modern world, we have the great universities, and we look at sort of those who have done a lot of education and their accomplishments. We look at people who, in the context of perhaps commerce, have been very successful. And there's sort of just the notion that, oh, they're out there. I couldn't possibly do what they're doing. So that's essentially lacking appreciation for our own capacity. So these three, when we have these three, we are sailing a leaking boat. So that's where we want to be aware of it. We want to see how this applies to us, and then be proactive in doing something about it. The three kinds of diligence, 87. Diligence, that's armor-like, beats the 4 demons down. Diligence in action brings us progress on the 10 grounds and paths. Diligence undaunted, irreversible, insatiable. Those who have all these will gain the goals that they desire. And again, this is not about some elitist project. It's about something that anybody can do. It's so often you see in the teachings how they have this expression, even a cowherd could do this. The Dharma, even a cowherd can practice the Dharma. And that's perhaps rude to the cowherds, but it really just implies that there's absolutely there's no reason to think that one doesn't have the necessary equipment, capacity. So that's where we identify four demons, 4 maras. And so there's an explanation here. It says, Kangyur Rinpoche says, the armies of the 4 demons, which obstruct the path of the Mahayana, are overcome by 3 things. So we'll look at what these 4 demons are, the 4 maras. So Yönten Gyatso, he then says, whichever path one wishes to practice, it is not sufficient simply to speak and act. It's important to pledge oneself with a powerful resolve. People who truly intend the benefit of others are in effect at war with 4 demons that hinder them from their goal. They must therefore acquire great fortitude, which is a powerful armor, impervious to the weapons of adversaries. In order to vanquish the demon of defilements, this is the Klesha Mara, which is then, here it says, a single of the 84,000 defilements is enough to prevent the attainment of liberation. Now, the defilements, the kleshas, they come from a fundamental delusion And this fundamental delusion is continually operating with a sense of I and the object. There's always this unconsciousness that doesn't really understand our nature and what we experience. I was reading Treasury of Rinpoche, who very accurately describes it as, when a child looks into a mirror, a baby looks into the mirror, they'll think that there's another baby in there, in the mirror they're seeing, the reflection. And that way also our duality, the way that we perceive reality, is based on this fundamental delusion. And from there, then of course, even though it's just our own projection, we begin to have, I like this, I don't like that. And that's where the kleshas originate, attachment and aversion, hatred and desire, and so forth. And that's where all these various kleshas, and that's where we talk about any of the 84,000 kinds of kleshas. Just one of these is enough to consolidate this fundamental delusion. It's what is operating on the premise of self and other, duality, this and that. So that's where completely failing to understand the nature, then we have kleshas that keep this going on. And so it just takes one of them. It could just be a small little resentment, I prefer this from that, So that's where we need to have an awareness of how subtle really this is. But that's then the first of the kleshas of the maras that we're describing here, the demon of the defilements. And because of that, in order to vanquish the demon of defilements, then it says, the practitioners must stick to their pledge, even if they have to persevere in it, beset by hundreds of difficulties for measureless kalpas. And it's that degree of commitment. It's not just like, oh, should I do, should I not do, should I, I've given up smoking, but I feel like having a cigarette. That's sort of like, oh, should I do this? That's sort of small time, but at the detriment of their own lives and so on. You have the stories of great bodhisattvas who have persevered, and that's intended for us. You can sometimes we would say these kind of displays, they're intended for us to really take heart in terms of our particular issues. It might be anger. It might be irritation. It might be sort of all the time wanting something else, or whatever it might be. So that's where there has to be this perseverance that doesn't fall under this delusion of the demon of defilements. As for the demon, child of the gods, the dissipator of concentration, when practitioners endure the hardships of the path, they take a pledge not to relinquish their diligence and strive to virtue, even if they gain the power, reputation, society, and affluence of a Chakravartin king. So that's essentially the demon where everything goes very well, and we gain power, reputation, and so forth. And that's where it's very easy for the practitioner to fall under the sort of the delusional thought, oh, I'm fantastic. Everything is so good. As long as things are going our way, we are actually thinking we are good, and we are sort of absorbed in ourselves, but not actually in a confident way, but on the basis of just things coming our way. Things are going so well. So this is again, of course, where we are fooled. And sometimes masters would say, that, you'll really see the worth of a practitioner when they find themselves in good circumstances. We sometimes hear, you'll see, how good your practice is when things go difficult, but that's sometimes actually seen as being easy, because when things are difficult for us, then our minds turn to the Dharma. And that's where, things might be difficult, our mind doesn't go to the Dharma, and that's obviously a failure on our part. But then again, there could very well be that difficult circumstances lead us to our mind to turn towards the Dharma. But some masters would point out it's even more difficult when things are actually going well. And then we might just sort of, oh, I don't really need to practice. Everything is so fine. And that's where there's this Mara that we call the Deva Putra Mara, or the child of gods. This pledge, again, our practice of diligence, that is supposedly then what vanquishes the army of the Maras, says here, this pledge is naturally accompanied by the armor that vanquishes the demon of death, the creator of obstacles to life. So that's where we also have the demon that simply where we are, you could say, lose the ground or the foundation of which is this present life where we have the opportunity to practice. And then we have the demon of the aggregates, which is a hindrance to the gaining of nirvana without remainder. And that's where then we're still attached to the sense of I. So finally, it is necessary to strive to integrate and bring into experience all the profound and vast teachings they are revealed in the Pitaka of the Mahayana. So what we need to do, what our pledge is about, and what our pledge is about is striving without being sidetracked. And our objective is to pursue the insight and the wisdom that the Buddha is providing us the key to, which are the teachings that we call the profound, particularly then the Madhyamika teachings on the nature of reality as being intrinsically lacking the solidity we think they do. That's called the profound teachings. And then the vast teachings that talk about all the qualities of the as it exists within both samsara and nirvana and on the path, but particularly also understanding then what it is that we have in terms of our experience and the potential of our experience. So that's where our journey on the Mahayana needs to be undertaken on the basis of this armor-like diligence. So that's where we say the first is courageous armor-like diligence, impervious to adverse circumstances. That's the first kind of diligence. Armor-like. We can't be stopped. We're like rhinoceros, just keeps pushing ahead. The second attitude to the four demons is diligence in action. This is the gradual implementation of the threefold discipline of the four paths of learning. Okay, when we're on the path, we very often describe the path in terms of threefold discipline, which are then the discipline of lifestyle, discipline as such, and then the meditation, practice of meditation, and then wisdom. So discipline, meditation, and wisdom. Sometimes we describe this as ethics, concentration, and wisdom. And this we apply on what we call the four paths of learning, which is in a way that we describe the path up to enlightenment, where we talk about the path of accumulation, the path of joining, and the path of seeing, and the path of meditation. These are the four paths, and it leads then to the fifth path, which is what we call the path of no more learning. So we would say the first four, which really constitute the journey, we call the path of learning, and then the last is enlightenment itself, which is called the path of no more learning. So sometimes we talk about the four paths, sometimes we talk about the five paths. And then it says here, beginners should most of all avoid negative actions. Those on the level of the path of aspiration must gather virtue, while those on the supreme bodhisattva grounds should devote themselves to the benefit of others. So the first two of the five paths, or the four paths, we refer to as the paths of aspiration. That's the path of accumulation and the path of joining. And then once we have, you could say, genuine insight into the nature of reality, then that's what we call the path of seeing. And that's then the bodhisattvas. That's the supreme bodhisattvas. They then are at a place where they have wisdom and as such, they can benefit others. So that's where what they should do. So that's diligence in action, and thereby never losing the defenses of one's courageous pledge. One brings to completion the 5 paths and perfects the 10 grounds, or 10 grounds which sometimes called the 10 bhumis. The third and final protection against the four demons, the third kind of diligence, is then is never to transgress one's pledge to benefit others, nor to allow one's diligence to weaken, either in intention or in action. So we should always really have this deep level of intention that never, we don't give up. It's like too much or whatever, and discouragement and so on, and also to actually be active on the basis of that intention. So he says, this indeed should be irreversible under all circumstances, regardless of the qualities of the path, regardless of the qualities of the path that might arise. This is referred to as insatiable diligence. Those who are endowed with this threefold diligence will, without any doubt, accomplish their aspirations both immediately and ultimately. And then there's something that you could say spurs us on in terms of our motivation, and that is reflecting on impermanence. Our life is like the closing of the day. Quickly, quickly does the dark of death draw near. And when it comes, our worldly works give no relief, though they be many, more than all the stars. So that's where it's not going to help that we have all sorts of superficial accomplishments. It says, yeah, our life is like a bright, sunny day. At the moment, we may have everything, dear friends, wealth, every kind of enjoyment. But moment by moment, life gradually wears away, like the sun journeying toward the mountains in the west. The deep darkness of death is creeping ever closer, like the shadows of the hills. And when death arrives, we will fitfully perceive relatives and friends sharing out all our belongings, telling each other what they're going to do with them. So this is the scenario of our life, which is an amazing situation, particularly here as we're gathered and are practitioners of the Dharma and have a vision of what basically our potential, if you like, and also the consequences of our situation. And that's where right now we have a situation, an extraordinary situation of understanding, insight, and so forth. And yet what happens is that this is running out. And this is one of these curious things where despite we know it, it's also incredible our capacity to ignore it. I'm talking about myself, where I know that I won't be here in very short time. And that's where I can look back and see how quickly time seems to pass, how increasingly quickly time seems to pass. And yet I get distracted by all sorts of superficial, inconsequential things. And that's where, I might have gathered all sorts of things that appear useful and interesting and good and so on. And yet, what good will it do? And for those who have accumulated a lot of stuff, in terms of material wealth and so on, when the time comes, then very often what one sees when a person passes away, people around, they're like vultures that come and want this and they want that, and people get into arguments about, the money or the possessions and so on. It becomes very ugly. And that's where this very often happens even before the person has passed away. And even the person that has passed away, they actually know what's going on. We would say that the person I think that's probably what this footnote is about, just to say. Yeah. It is said in the teachings on the intermediary state, the Bardo, right, that the recently dead possesses a certain clairvoyance and are able to perceive their former habitat and companions and are aware of the latter's thoughts and actions. And that's where even the person has passed away, they actually are still witness to all the squabbling and dispute that happens on account of those that are left behind fighting over their possessions. And that's not going to be helpful. That's not helpful for their further journey. So that's where we need to so much appreciate the value of our present situation. So that's where we're reminded here that meaning death, this is the final conclusion of our worldly works. Though they be more numerous than the stars at night, they all come to this. And if we have failed to practice virtue, and virtue here just means practice, right? Before death comes, there will be no reprieve from the terrors and dangers of the Bardo state, the offerings and the positive actions of the living notwithstanding. As the Bodhicharya Avatara says, and when the heralds of the deadly king have gripped me, what help to me will be my friends or kin? And that's where, of course, we can do all sorts of things for the person that has passed away, and we should, and it's, you know, it certainly does more good than harm, that's for sure. But at the same time, the thrust of the further journey will really be their particular karma and their particular what's in their mind. And if their mind is gripped by the toxicity of either their own doing or witnessing what's going on with what's happening after they've passed, then there's a tremendously toxic condition that actually is not very helpful, to say the least, for someone who is then in the bardo. 89. The mighty stream of diligence which clears away the turbid ooze of laziness and never deviates, flows on with swift and tireless strength until it pours into the ocean of omniscience. And the thing is, we have a pretty good alternative to what was just described, which is the practice of the Dharma, and the practice of the Dharma with diligence. It says here, diligence is a friend that purifies the cloudy, muddy waters of laziness. Thanks to it, progress on the path becomes steady and continuous, like the 4 rivers. Let's see what 4 rivers we're talking about here. These are the Ganges, Indus, Oxus, and Tarim, 4 rivers rising in the Himalayas and flowing into India. So this diligence is then what brings us down to this great ocean of omniscience, flowing to the great ocean, which never stagnate or run dry, like lesser streams. So diligence is like a great river, not a little sort of like little attempts, little streams. In the same way, until reaching the ocean of omniscient wisdom, the powerful diligence of unremitting and respectful practice, devoid of the extremes of excessive tension and slackness, will carry us forward irresistibly to the level of perfect fruition. So that's where we have it all. We have it all in terms of our present conditions, and the nature of this journey is the ultimate goal of the dissolution of all the confusion, the awakening of wisdom that lacks any kind of delusion or limitation. So that's where we're handed here the what to do, what it is that what we'd want to do for our own sake, and also for the sake of all those that are connected with us, essentially all sentient beings. So that's where we want to keep this in mind. I'm actually, if it's all right with you, you're allowed to protest, but I might finish here today. I have another class that starts in about 20 minutes, and I'd like to just prepare a little bit. So if it's okay with you, then I will conclude at this point, which makes sense because then we're going to be going into the paramita of jhana or concentration next time. Samten ki parul tu chimpa. Are there any questions?
Hello, is it okay to unmute for a minute?
Absolutely, please.
Okay.
Hold on, let me just.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I'm working at the same time, so
Yeah,
I'm just an audio.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just really wanted to say that this part is so clarifying and so brilliant. So yeah, the book and your explanation as well. And I think especially maybe for us Westerners, where we often struggle with this problem of, not having self-confidence. And I just wanted to say that it seems to me that this part of the types of laziness and the what's it called, the how to counteract them would be absolutely brilliant and very adapted also for people who just discover Buddhism a little bit. It would be wonderful to have like a public talk or something. So I just wanted to say that, and maybe, I don't know, encourage you to do a conference in that one time that's open to everyone.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Veronica. Thank you for your encouragement. And I'm glad this is landing in a good place. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems so adapted, and I think there is very little to do actually to just maybe take away a little bit of the specialized jargon, and it would be perfectly understandable to modern people, to talk about laziness and diligence in the way the teachings do, and that you just did.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's food for thought, how to actually articulate this in a context which goes beyond just, you could say, the path of enlightenment. But of course, this is particularly for the path of enlightenment. But you're right, and it has also so much to do with really appreciating the value of being alive, which for many modern people, even that is not obvious. So yeah. Thank you. All right. Any other questions here? Very nice to see some of you, and also know that some of those who I can't see, they are also there.
Hey, Jakob.
Hey, good to see you. All right. Well, look.
But Jakob, may I just ask a question? I'm very interested in the 4 maras. Do you have, and can you recommend any other text that gives even more details than here?
Nothing comes to mind, but it's very often something that's discussed in the context of chud.
I know, that's why I asked.
I know there are quite a few books out there about chud practice, and inevitably there would be some discussions about the 4 maras there. Yeah.
Is there any chud book, a book on chud that you would recommend?
Gosh, I remember years ago a French guy called Jérôme Edoux. He translated a big work on Maciej Labdran.
Oh, okay.
So maybe try and look at that. Jérôme Edoux, Edou.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, yeah. But it's also something that's basic to, I mean, in the words of my perfect teacher, because in the Longchen Yingtik there's a short practice of chud. There would also be some explanation on the 4 maras there.
I know, I've read them, but I'm looking for more details.
Yeah. Let me know if you find anything.
Okay.
It would be very valuable. We can put it up in the resources. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, we'll conclude with dedication just to say. Let's see here.
How does this? Yeah.
Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. Thank you very much.